My daughter called me on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary Tuesday where nothing should go wrong. She said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about something. Can I come over tonight?" I said, "Sure." Figured she wanted to borrow my truck again, or needed help with something around her place. I was in the middle of rebuilding a carburetor on my '67 Mustang, the one I'd been restoring for 11 years. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and didn't think much of it. That was before everything changed. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 64 years old, retired from 32 years with the Dallas Fire Department, and I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew my son. I was wrong about that in ways I'm still processing. I have 2 kids. My daughter, Rebecca, lives 20 minutes away in Frisco with her husband and my 2 grandkids. She works in compliance for a pharmaceutical company. Sharp, organized. The kind of person who reads the fine print on everything. My son, my older one, is Alan. Alan moved back to Dallas from Atlanta about 2 years ago after his second divorce. He said he wanted to be closer to family. Said he'd missed us. I believed him because he was my son. And you believe what your children tell you when they say they want to come home. My wife, Carolyn, passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The house went quiet in a way I hadn't known was possible. We'd been married 37 years. After she was gone, I rattled around in that 4-bedroom house in Plano like a marble in a shoebox. Alan offered to move in. He said he was between places after the divorce, needed somewhere stable for a few months. Said it would be good for both of us. I wouldn't be alone. He'd have time to get back on his feet. I thought about Carolyn, how she'd want me to help our boy when he was struggling. I said yes. That was my first mistake. He moved in March of 2022. By June, he brought in Renata. Renata was his girlfriend. I'd met her once before the move-in. Briefly, at a dinner Alan had set up. She was polite, well-dressed, talked a lot about investment opportunities and real estate markets. I didn't think much of her. Alan seemed happy, and after 2 divorces, I figured he'd earned a little happiness. What I didn't see coming was how the 2 of them worked together. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing ever is when it's your own family. It started with finances. Alan knew I had savings. 32 years of firefighter pension. A life insurance payout from Carolyn's policy. And the house, which I owned outright. He knew the numbers because I'd been transparent about them when he moved in. He was my son. I thought transparency was trust. He started small. Could I co-sign a business loan for a venture he and Renata were starting? A home renovation consulting company. I said no. Told him I didn't co-sign loans for anyone. He dropped it. I forgot about it. Then Renata started coming around more. Staying over, eventually just living there without it ever being officially discussed. She was pleasant to my face, helpful around the house, always bringing up my health in a soft, concerned way. "You look tired, Roy. Have you had your blood pressure checked lately, Roy?" Roy is my name. I'm Roy Alderman, retired battalion chief, Engine Company 14. The health comments increased. So did the suggestions that I might want to think about the future. What would happen to the house if something happened to me? Whether I had a will. Whether the will was up to date. I answered their questions, honestly, because they were family and because I was 63 years old and not suspicious by nature. Then Renata mentioned that her cousin was an estate attorney. Said he could look over my documents for free as a favor. I said I already had an attorney. She said hers was better, specialized in protecting assets for retirees. I said I'd think about it. I didn't call her cousin. A week later, Alan came to me with a piece of paper. A financial power of attorney form, already filled out, naming him as my agent. He said it was just a precaution, said the guys at his poker night all had them for their aging parents, that it was standard now, that it protected me. I told him I'd have my own attorney look at it first. He got quiet in the way he used to get quiet when he was a teenager and didn't get what he wanted. I recognized it. I called my attorney, George Patton, not the general. He's made that joke 10,000 times the next morning. George looked at the form and called me back in 2 hours. Roy, he said, this isn't a standard POA. It's broad. It gives an authority over your bank accounts, your investment accounts, and your real property, effective immediately upon signing. No oversight required. I put the paper in my desk drawer and didn't mention it to Alan. That was when I started paying attention. I'm a light sleeper. 32 years of being ready to go at 3 in the morning will do that to you. And I started noticing things I'd been too comfortable to catch before. Alan and Renata talking in low voices in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone to bed. Renata on the phone with someone, speaking quietly, using words like timeline and assessed value. Alan asking the neighbors casual questions about the neighborhood, what houses were selling for. The garage camera I'd installed after a break-in 2 years ago covered part of the driveway. I checked the footage one night and saw Alan outside at 11 p.m. on a call, pacing. I couldn't hear it, but I could see his body language, the way you learn to read people after 3 decades of emergency scenes. He was not having a casual conversation. I called Rebecca. She came over the next evening under the pretense of dropping off the kids for a quick visit, and while Alan and Renata watched the grandkids in the backyard, I showed her the POA form. I showed her the garage footage. I told her about the health comments, the conversations about the house. Rebecca sat very still for a long moment. Then she said, "Dad, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you something." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of the Facebook group, a private group for people dealing with elderly parent real estate fraud in Texas. Someone had posted asking for advice about a family situation. They described an older father in Plano, a retired city employee, a house worth around $580,000, a son who'd moved back in, a girlfriend who was pushing for POA control. The details were not identical to mine, but they were close enough that Rebecca's hands were shaking when she showed me. The post had been made by a username that connected, after some searching, to an email address Alan had used for other accounts. Rebecca is not in law enforcement, but she's in compliance, which means she knows how to build a paper trail. She'd been quietly documenting for 6 weeks before she came to me. She hadn't told me because she wasn't certain yet and didn't want to be wrong about her brother. She was not wrong. We called a family attorney that night, a woman named Gail Forsyth, who specialized in elder financial exploitation cases in Collin County. Gail had heard versions of this story before. She said the POA form Alan had presented was a type she'd seen in several fraud cases, drafted to appear routine but structured to give near-complete control. She asked if I had documentation of anything unusual with my finances. I hadn't given Alan any access to accounts, but I went through my bank statements that night and found 3 charges I didn't recognize. Small amounts, under $50 each, from a company name I couldn't place. I called the bank. The charges had been made through a card attached to a secondary account I'd opened years ago and barely used. A card I kept in a box in my home office. The box had been moved. I noticed it then. It was in a slightly different position than I always kept it. I know, because after Carolyn died, I became particular about where things were. It's a grief habit, holding on to the geography of your own home. Alan had been in my office. He'd found the card. He'd made test charges to see if I'd notice. I hadn't. Until now. Gail told me to stop using that account immediately and contact the bank's fraud department. She also told me not to confront Alan yet. She said, "Roy, if he knows you know, things could escalate quickly. We need to document first." I knew how to take orders. 32 years of chain of command, I said, understood. That weekend, Alan told me he'd arranged for a guy to come appraise the house. Said it was good to know the value for insurance purposes. I said fine, let him know ahead of time. I called Gail immediately after. She said, "Do not let anyone in to appraise that house without your attorney present." I called the number Alan gave me for the appraiser. It was not a licensed Texas appraiser. I looked up the license database on the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board website. The name didn't appear. I wrote everything down in a notebook I kept in my truck. Rebecca had a contact, a woman she'd worked with on a compliance audit who had since moved to the Texas Attorney General's office, specifically to the Elder Financial Crimes Unit. Rebecca reached out quietly. The contact said she couldn't discuss an active matter, but that if we had documentation, there were formal channels, and she could make sure it reached the right desk quickly. We filed a formal complaint in early October. I didn't know what would happen next or how fast. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday night, my phone rang at 11:45. It was Rebecca, Dad. Her voice was the controlled, calm voice she uses when things are serious. I just got a call from my contact at the AG's office. They've been working on this. It's bigger than we thought, Dad. Renata has done this before. There's an open investigation in Tarrant County. A different family, similar situation, similar POA scheme. She and Alan are both on the radar. The AG's office is moving this week. You need to take Alan's key off your keyring tonight. Change your security code before you go to bed. And Dad, don't say anything to Alan. Not yet. Just go to sleep like everything is normal. I lay in bed that night listening to the house. Renata was upstairs in the guest room. Alan was in the room next to hers. I'd shared this house with Carolyn for 22 years. I'd watched my kids grow up in it, had birthday parties in the backyard, Thanksgiving dinners in the dining room. My grandkids called it Grandpa's house, and I was lying in the dark waiting for something I couldn't predict while my own son slept 2 doors down. I didn't sleep. At 7:15 the next morning, 2 investigators from the Texas AG's Elder Crimes Unit knocked on my front door. I'd been up since 5, had coffee made. I answered the door and stepped aside. Alan came downstairs 20 minutes later in a t-shirt and sweatpants and stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw the investigators in his living room. His living room. That's how he thought of it by then. I could see it on his face. The investigators identified themselves. They explained they had questions about a complaint of elder financial exploitation and attempted property fraud. They asked Alan to come with them for a voluntary interview. He looked at me. I looked back. I didn't say a word. He said he wanted a lawyer. They said that was his right and handed him a card. Renata came down 20 minutes after that. She had her bags partially packed. I noticed that too, the way she'd assessed the situation faster than Alan had. One of the investigators stayed at the door. I went to the kitchen and had another cup of coffee. By 9 a.m., both of them had left the house. Alan was in his car, on the phone with an attorney. Renata had called a rideshare. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet and looked at the backyard. The live oak Carolyn had planted when we first moved in was starting to turn. October in North Texas finally cooling down. I called my bank the forenoon and had all accounts flagged, the secondary card cancelled, and a security review initiated. I called George and told him what had happened. He said, "Roy, I'm glad you called me when you did." I called a locksmith that afternoon. The investigation took 4 months to complete. Renata had done a version of this twice before, once in Tarrant County with an elderly widower, once in Oklahoma, where the case had stalled due to jurisdictional complications. In both cases, she and a male partner had targeted recently widowed homeowners, used the same broad POA template, and in the Tarrant County case had successfully had the victim sign over a durable POA. Before anyone caught it, that victim lost $214,000 before his adult son noticed irregular transfers and called an attorney. Alan had known about Renata's history. The investigation confirmed it. His phone records showed conversations with her going back to 8 months before he moved in with me, long before the divorce that had supposedly necessitated his return home. He had been part of the plan from the beginning. I sat with that for a long time. My son had not come home to be close to family. He had come home because his girlfriend had identified me as a target, a recently widowed homeowner with a paid-off property and accessible savings. A father who loved his son and would open the door when that son said he needed help. The charges filed were elder financial exploitation under Texas Penal Code Chapter 32, attempted theft of real property, and conspiracy. Renata faced additional charges related to the Tarrant County case. Alan's attorney negotiated, but the AG's office didn't have much patience for negotiation. Renata took a plea, 4 years, Texas Department of Criminal Justice plus restitution to the Tarrant County victim. Alan went to trial and was convicted on 2 counts. He received 6 years. He is currently at the Dalhart unit. I did not attend the sentencing. Rebecca offered to come with me. I told her I didn't need to be there, that I'd said what I needed to say in my victim impact statement, which I wrote myself and submitted through Gail's office. I said that I had spent 32 years running into buildings other people were running out of, that I had never once considered not doing my job, and that I had raised my children to understand that your word meant something, and that family was not a tool. I said that my son had been counting on me to be what age and loss had tried to make me: isolated, uncertain, easy. I told the court I was none of those things. I meant every word. The civil matter was straightforward after the criminal convictions. Gail filed on my behalf for recovery of the fraudulent card charges and for court costs. The amount was small, less than $200 in actual unauthorized charges, since I'd caught it early. But there was also the matter of Alan's back rent, which we'd never formalized because I hadn't thought I needed to. 20 months of occupancy in a home with a fair market rental value of $2,800 per month. The court entered a judgment against him for $56,000. He'll be paying that off for a long time. Rebecca came by the week after sentencing with takeout from the barbecue place I like on Preston Road. We sat on the back patio while her kids played on the swing set I'd built for them 3 summers ago. The live oak was fully bare by then. The yard covered in dry leaves I'd been meaning to rake. She asked me how I was doing. I told her the truth, which is that I was okay and also not okay, in the way that 2 things can be true at once when one of them is the kind of grief that doesn't have a name yet. You don't lose a son the same way you lose a wife. With Carolyn, there was only love and absence. With Alan, it was more complicated. There was grief, but there was also anger. And underneath the anger, there was something I didn't have a word for. The feeling of having been studied, of having been assessed like a property, evaluated for vulnerability. That your love for someone was the thing they used against you. Rebecca put her hand on mine and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The house is still mine. I want to be clear about that. There were moments in those months when I wasn't sure it would be. Not because I believed Alan would succeed, but because I understood how these things could go if I'd been less attentive, or if I hadn't had Rebecca, or if I hadn't called George when I did. A lot of people in my situation don't catch it until it's too late. The Tarrant County victim didn't. I kept working on the Mustang. It's a meditation for me. The same way clocks were for other people, the same way a garden is for others. There's something honest about an engine. Every part has a function. Every failure has a cause. You don't have to guess at it. You diagnose it. You fix it. You move forward. I got the carburetor running right in December. The engine turned over on a cold morning, and I sat in the driver's seat in my garage and just listened to it. Carolyn used to tease me about that car, said I loved it more than I loved her. I'd tell her she was right, and she'd throw a dish towel at me. The memory sat in my chest like something warm. I've had 2 letters from Alan since the conviction. I didn't open the first one. I opened the second one, read it, and set it on the workbench next to a socket set I needed to reorganize. He said he was sorry. He said Renata had convinced him it wasn't really hurting me. He said he'd lost perspective. He said a lot of things that may or may not be true, and that I didn't know how to weigh yet. I put the letter in a coffee tin on a shelf in the garage. I'm not ready to throw it away. I'm not ready to respond to it. Maybe someday, when 6 years have passed and he stood in front of me and said what he said in the letter out loud, without an audience and without anything left to gain from it. Maybe then I'll know if there's anything worth rebuilding. Or maybe not. Some engines are too far gone. Rebecca brings the grandkids over most Sundays now. Her son, who is 8, has decided he wants to learn about cars. He stands next to me in the garage in sneakers that are always untied, handing me wrenches and asking why every single thing works the way it does. I answer every question because that's what you do with someone who genuinely wants to learn. Last Sunday, he asked me why the Mustang was red. I told him his grandmother had picked the color. He thought about that. Then he said, she had good taste. I told him she did. She really did. She really did. I'm 64 years old. I have my house, my health, my daughter, and 2 grandkids who show up on Sundays. I have a 1967 Mustang that runs now. Finally, the way it was always meant to. I have 32 years of showing up when things were on fire and not running the other direction. And whatever comes next, I have that. Some men reach my age and think the hard part is over. I used to think that. But the hard part isn't over. It just changes shape. The fire isn't always in a building. Sometimes it's right inside your own front door, wearing the face of someone you raised, speaking in the voice of family, counting on you to trust it because you always have before. The difference is knowing when to stop trusting and start paying attention. I learned that late. But I learned it, and I'm still here. If this story means something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories and leave a comment. I read every one. People ask me sometimes how I caught it. Like there was a single moment, a dramatic reveal, a scene where everything clicked at once. It wasn't like that. It was slow. It was a box moved 2 inches from where I always kept it. It was a word. Timeline, spoken in a low voice in my own kitchen after 11 at night. It was a form that looked official until someone who knew better told me it wasn't. That's how it works. Not a sudden storm. A slow leak you don't notice until the floor is already soft under your feet. Alan counted on me being a certain kind of man. The kind of man who'd been through enough loss that he was tired. Who loved his son enough to stop asking questions. Who trusted family because family was supposed to be the one place you didn't have to protect yourself. He wasn't entirely wrong about who I was. He was wrong about what I'd do when I finally saw it clearly. I spent 32 years running into buildings that were on fire. I know what it costs to ignore what's right in front of you. I know what happens when people assume someone else will handle it. You learn, after enough years on the job, that waiting for someone else to act is how people get killed. That the hardest part of any call isn't the fire. It's the moment you have to make a decision without all the information, and you make it anyway. What Alan and Renata understood about me was that I was grieving and alone. What they didn't understand was that grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise. When Carolyn died, I became very careful about what I kept and what I let go, where I put things, how I moved through my own house. That precision, the kind that comes from loss, not from fear, is what saved me. A box 2 inches out of place. A card I never used. 3 charges under $50 each. Renata had done this before. She knew the math. She knew that most people in my position don't notice small things. She was not wrong about most people, but she was a professional at targeting the vulnerable, and she underestimated what 32 years of reading a scene teaches a person. Here's what I know now that I didn't fully know before. The people who mean to take from you will almost always come dressed as help. They will speak in the language of concern. They will use your own love as a door. Alan didn't walk into my house as an enemy. He walked in as my son who needed me, and I let him in because that's what you do for your children. I don't regret opening the door. I regret nothing about being a father who still wanted to believe in his son. That instinct is not a flaw, but it has to live alongside something else. The willingness to keep your eyes open even when what you might see is something you don't want to find. Rebecca kept her eyes open for 6 weeks before she came to me. She wasn't certain. She didn't want to be wrong about her brother. That kind of care, holding difficult information until you can bring it with evidence instead of fear, is its own kind of courage. I'm proud of her in a way I don't have the right words for yet. The Mustang runs now. My grandson hands me wrenches on Sunday mornings and asks questions I answer every single one of. That's the life I have, and it's mine, and no one is going to take it. That's enough. That's more than enough.